Welcome to Community Conversations. My name is Aili McKeen. I'm your host tonight. I'm here with Hilda Santiago, who is Democratic candidate for Secretary of the State. Hello, Hilda.
Hello, Aili. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. I am so honored to be here with you.
Oh, we're going to have some fun. So I wanted to ask a little bit for our viewers, what are the major duties of the Secretary of the State of Connecticut?
One of the major duties of the Secretary of the State is to oversee the election process in the whole state. So she has to make sure that the town clerks and the registrar of voters are trained in order to expedite the election process, especially on election day. One of her other duties is also to make sure that if there's any problems in voting, there's any voter fraud, that she is the point of contact. There is a hotline number through the state of Connecticut in case anything happens on election day that the registrar see that is a little suspicious, or somebody's trying to pass a bad ballot or have a wrong identity or something, then the day of the election, then she is notified. And then there's a process of going through where even the state attorney's office gets involved, and even the FBI if they have to.
Wow.
And then there's the small business component of it. The small business component is registering businesses to make sure that there's a way to get them into the process of becoming an LLC. There's no duplication of businesses. Now you have to go through the DECD website in order to connect and to be a small business. They're doing everything online now. That just started at the beginning of January, around January 10th or so. So it's easier for people to register as a small business. And there's also other duties like the Justice of the Peace Manual. The Secretary of the State also keeps all records of public hearings and public meetings in the state of Connecticut. They just didn't know where to put it at, so they kind of put it all in that office. There's also authentication of material, of documents that they also do, also through commerce and through immigration and places like that with the federal level. So those are just some of the duties that the Secretary of the State does. And they also keep all public records. There's a blue book every year that comes out with all the statutes in it, and that's the responsibility of the Secretary of the State.
Wow. So it's like everything that other states do with county government, it's all it would be in your offices.
Exactly. Yes, because we don't, as you know, we don't have county government.
Right.
We have 169 towns that have the election process, and it's her job to make sure that everything is running correctly. The technology is something that can be updated. That would be something that I would work on to make sure that everybody has the technology in order to make the election process and the voting process a lot more convenient and easier for voters.
I've been an election audit monitor in the past, and I don't know if actually they're all being done now in the Secretary of State's office electronically, or if they're still doing hand counts in some towns.
That's the issue, that some of it is still being computerized and some of it is doing by hand counts. But all of it has to be sent to the Secretary of the State's office, and that office will audit everything to make sure that the votes were cast correctly. Once it's audited at the local level, and they would make sure that everything's all set so that they can declare a winner.
The electronic audits go so much faster, and they're pretty fun to watch. You oversee State Election Enforcement Commission as well?
No, the state enforcement, the SEEC, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, is a entity basically by themselves.
Oh.
They work in conjunction with the Secretary of the State, but they oversee elections to make sure that campaign folks are getting trained, that treasurers are getting trained. They also make sure that that forms are correct. When your forms are sent to the SEEC, that they're dated correctly, so that you don't have to pay a fine in case you're a treasurer. They also make sure that when you're doing local elections, that information goes to the municipality. They keep all the records. At the state level, they oversee the 6 constitutionals, the state reps, and the state senate. They also deal with keeping records of who the lobbyists are, and they also make sure that all the reports are turned in on time. So those are some of the things. And if there's any kind of voter fraud, they do the investigation of anything that happens at the city or town level.
What do you envision for expanded voter access and early voting? I interviewed Denise Merrill 4 years ago, and she was really lobbying for early voting at that time.
Yes, there was a time when it went to the referendum, and a lot of people didn't know that it was part of the voting. When you went in and you did the elections for the candidates, they didn't know that there was a referendum being done for early voting. In order to do early voting in the state of Connecticut, you have to change the state constitution. And I want to be clear when I say state constitution, because a lot of people only think of the federal constitution. It's already written in there about early voting, so you have to have a referendum. Last year, through the GAE committee, which is the General Administration and Elections Committee, which I sit on, and I've been there for 3 terms, is the one that she puts the bill forward, and we make sure that it comes to committee, that it's screened as such, and that you have those relationships, which is something that I have with many of the representatives and the senators in order to pass a bill. So you have to have that bonding, that relationship with other elected officials in order to get your bills passed. So we were able to do that last year, and now it's going to a referendum this year in 2022. So it's going to be very important to make sure that the voters know that it's on the ballot. And it's a very simple question. It's a yes or no, because once we get the numbers in the state of Connecticut, then we can win that referendum. And then we would have to take it to the legislature. That'll be for 2023. And then they would decide with, public hearings of the town clerks and the registrars, public officials, anybody else that's interested in early voting, maybe the universities, they can come and talk about why it's important to have early voting. We're one of the 6 states in the country that still doesn't have early voting. So it's important because people sometimes have 2 and 3 jobs. They can't get away from work. They have to pick up their kids. They have to go home. So they can do it at their convenience in order to vote early. So the legislature would be the one to decide if it's going to be 3 days, if it's going to be a week, is it going to be 2 weeks? And with the help of the Secretary of the State and other representatives, then they can decide how long that period of early voting is going to be. And again, you just have to be able to listen to people and then weigh in as to what, and put in your opinion of what you think is the best way that we should do early voting in the state of Connecticut. And I'm excited about that because I think that, changing the Constitution and having people vote early is going to make a great difference in people coming out to vote. And it's all about community engagement. I know people talk about civic engagement. People don't know what civic is. Community engagement is what we need to get the word out. That means going to where the folks are at, whether it's festivals, health fairs, the Polish fair, all kinds of festivals. Get people registered and let them know that there's a change in the Constitution and also that there's a referendum this year. So I plan in going around the state talking about early voting and how important it is. And also, we have the no excuse absentee ballot. We didn't pass it last year. We passed it enough to keep it alive for 2023. We didn't get enough votes. We didn't get the 101 votes that we needed, but it was alive. So that way it comes before the legislature, the General Assembly again in 2023. So I'm excited about that because that worked so well during the COVID in the last 2 years, where people really used the absentee ballot because they didn't want to get sick. And they really used it in their effort to come out to vote. Even in Meriden, one of my biggest precincts is John Barry as a state representative. And even though we had the no excuse absentee ballot, people still wanted to come out and vote.
A lot of people like to vote in person.
Yes.
I actually used the absentee ballot for the primary, but I got nervous about whether or not my vote would count, so I voted in person in November.
Yes, yes, and that's what a lot of people did. I think I only voted absentee ballot for the primary. That was the first time I ever did that.
Yeah, same
Just
here.
to try it.
Yeah.
But I still went on that day, and the lines were, as when Obama was running in 2008, the lines were that big, that long, in the city of Meriden, so it was kind of exciting.
We found that it was just a matter of timing, because Bruce, my husband, went to the poll on his way home from work, and he had a long line. And I left for work right as he was coming home, so I was 20 minutes behind him at the poll, and there was no line for me. So it was all
Yes.
just a matter of timing. But a lot of people, you're on your way to work. I always vote in mornings now. And you don't have time to stand around there for an hour waiting to get
Exactly.
through. You don't have anything to do with redistricting, right?
No, Denise Merrill, the secretary, did come and testify before the GAE committee about gerrymandering, because gerrymandering was a little bit more, it was different, where you have folks in prisons and they were not able to vote, but they were being used as numbers in that particular town. So, like, for example, in the town of Cheshire, the prison there had 200 and some odd people that lived in Meriden that were there, but they weren't being used in Meriden's numbers as the population that were being used in Cheshire, and that
Right.
makes a difference.
Oh, yeah.
When you're getting funding. We kind of changed that now, so that wherever the last residents of the prisoner lived, that's going to be used for the population of that town.
At this point in time, can incarcerated people vote?
Not incarcerated. There have been bills that have been put forward, but people that are on parole, we just passed that last year. So if they're on parole, they can certainly put in to vote and, register to vote. And the system will let them know whether they can vote or not, because there are still some felonies that people can't vote.
That's interesting. Why do you want to be Secretary of State? I mean, you're a state representative now, and you have quite a bit of influence, having served 5 full terms.
This is my 5th term.
So
Yeah.
you've built a lot of those relationships, and you have quite a bit of influence. So why Secretary of State now?
I've been registering people for a very long time. I was on the Meriden DTC for 17 years before I got elected to the city council. And I was always involved in registering people everywhere, every time I could. And then we would make sure through the DTC that we went back and picked them up and took them out to vote, because that's so important. Because if they see you voting, then they are more likely to vote, especially in the minority community. Then I was an elected official at the city council for 8 years before I became a state rep. I've always been involved in the community, always trying to help people through their lives with issues that they might have, whether it was through domestic violence or finding a job or health care, signing up for health care, doing all that kind of stuff, especially in the city of Meriden. There was a lot of things I was involved in the community. And I always ask people, are you voting? And they would say, no, I'm not registered. I said, well, why not? And I would say to them, it's so important that you have a voice, that you're sitting at the table, that you can tell a politician, look, I don't like what you're saying, so I'm not going to vote for you. Or you can say to a particular person that's running for office and say, I like what you're saying. I can listen to what you're saying, because you really have an influence in how to get things done. And they'll vote for you. And that means that they have a voice. Because if you don't like what I'm saying, or you don't like what I represent, then let me know. Because I like to listen to why you don't like how I'm voting, you don't like that law, and maybe I can explain it to you a little bit better as to why I voted specifically a different way for that law. And when you explain to people how important their vote is, then they're going to go out to vote, because it matters. Because if I know what I'm explaining to you matters to me and why it's important and how it's going to change your life, then they're going to listen, and they're going to say, hey, she really cares about me voting, so I have to make sure I vote. There was this gentleman in Meriden that lived there for many, many years, and he never voted. His wife always voted, but he never voted. And finally, when I was running for city council, he came out to vote. And I would see him at the store and says, I voted for you. I would say to him, I know you voted for me. Thank you so much. Let me know if you have any issues or any problems. But every time he saw me, he was so proud that he had voted for me. And that makes me feel good, because at least he knows that whatever issues he may have, I'm going to bring him to the table, and he'll be able to get a resolution if it's an issue that he has with City Hall. And as a state rep, that's what I also did. I'm very involved in the community. I love to listen to people, listen to their ideas, because, hey, people have different experiences. And there might be something that they experience with something that I don't know about. It's always so important to have a voice at the table. As a mother raising 2 kids, what I went through domestic violence, through homelessness, and people not listening to me, I was very, very adamant about making sure that I voted. And I had a voice at the table. So when I helped all people, especially through special ed, because that's how basically I started getting involved, because my son was in special ed, and the Board of Ed didn't want to help me putting him in a special program, because I knew that if I didn't advocate for him and just let him go through the school system, he would have ended up dropping out, or because he had mental health issues, and I want to make sure he got the services while he was in school. It was so important because the people on the Board of Ed didn't look like me. They were all men. They were all white. They didn't have the difficulties that I had as head of a household. I had 3 jobs at one time, and I wanted to make sure that my child got the services he needed. So I fought for that. And after a while, they asked me, well, do you want to run for the Board of Ed? And I said, yeah, I'll run. I did lose that election. I was appointed to the city council in 96, 97. And then I ran that election in 97. I lost by 65 votes. And then the seat became open in 2005, and I won that seat by over 500 votes against 3 men. I was able now to prove that if you're consistent and you're adamant about being involved in politics, and you can, sooner or later win a seat, to be there, to be able to be that voice for people that don't know how to have that voice, to know their rights. And that's basically why I ran. And then when this position became available at the state level, I said, well, I might as well go for it, because it's another woman that's running instead of the lieutenant governor being the only woman running. And I saw a chance for people like me that went through what I went through to have a seat at the table, and to be able to voice through me, by listening to them, what their rights are and what their needs are, and what resolutions we can work with other people to work together. So that's, one of the reasons why I wanted to run for Secretary of the State. And I want to be that voice for people.
That's great. One of my earliest memories, by the way, is being in my mother's arms, so I had to be maybe 3 at the most, and her taking me into the voting booth. And back then there was the party lever, and she's like, you just do this, ching, ching, and it votes for all the same people in the party, and then they did away with that probably like the 2nd or 3rd year I was voting. But people have said, oh, if they had childcare at the polls. Well, if you have enough polls for enough people, for all the people, the lines are not long, you carry your kid with you and set that example, and then they'll be voters when they grow up.
Yes.
And I think that's great. The other thing is, a lot of people think of politics as being so distasteful, when really what we're talking about is being active in governance. I try to separate politics as the arts and sciences of winning elections, and then the actual work at the table is not politics, it's governance.
Yes.
And it's really important to be aware and involved. And everybody in Connecticut can have a voice if they just figure out how to look up bills on the CGA website and then submit testimony. It's pretty easy.
Exactly. That's how you can have a say-so in everything that's being passed at the state level, at the local level, and at the federal level. And you don't have to really know what the issues are all the time. You do a little bit of reading of the newspapers, you do a little bit of watching the news, but you have somebody you're going to call, and that person's going to return your phone call and say, okay, what's going on? How can I help you? Doing community outreach is so important, because the people in Hartford don't vote for you. It's the people in your community that vote for you. So you have to be visible, you have to be involved, and people have to see you. You know, I belong to the ELSA, I go to their events. I go to the Kiwanis, you know, I'm a member of the Kiwanis, but I'm also go to the farmer's market, and I go to the small festivals.
It makes you just accessible.
Exactly. You know, it got to a time that I would go shopping late at night, because if I went shopping during the day, I would never get out of the store. And I've helped so many other candidates. After a while, people were saying, well, Hilda, why don't you run? I said, well, you know, I'll think about it. I was always a person that was behind the scenes. And I loved helping people, and that excitement was great. And then when my opportunity came and the door was open, so I went for it. We don't have enough women in our General Assembly.
I agree.
You know, we need more women running from all levels of the economic spectrum. And the thing that is so great about Connecticut is that we have the Connecticut Elections Program, the
Yes.
CEP program, where as a state rep, you just have to raise $5,100, get 150 signatures for $5, and you'll get a grant to run. You'll get another $33,000 to run your campaign. And you raise that with your friends and families and people you know at the stores, at the churches, at the community events, at the, you know, the boards that you belong. And as a state senator, of course, you know, you have to raise $15,000. I think it's $100,000 in order to run altogether for state senate. It depends, because now you have more towns that you have to go to.
Right.
And I like just being in Meriden. Now running as Secretary of the State, it's so exciting because you get to see so many other different towns and the forms of governments that they have, with a strong mayor, a ceremonial mayor, you got your selectmen, you got the RTMs in Fairfield and Bridgeport, which I never knew. There's like 40 or 50 people running for these consuls that they have. I'm learning all of that, and I said it's very exciting to, you know, all these years that I've been in the state of Connecticut, it's so different. All these towns are different. Their downtowns are lovely, and it makes me feel good that being on the city council, I was part of, you know, changing paving roads and property taxes, and making sure that the police and the fire department had their budgets, and the health department was open. And so you look at all of that now when you go to certain towns, and you see the involvement of the communities. It's really exciting, and I really like the traveling. I still have a lot of towns to go to. I've been doing this since July, when I was an exploratory, and going around and meeting the DTC chairs, and going to events, and going to barbecues, and all kinds of stuff, and all over the state. So I still have a lot to do, so I'm really excited about it.
That's got to be one of the big plus sides to all those festivals, is the food.
Yes, the food.
I love
yes.
food.
Yes. And you get to meet so many registrars and so many town clerks and city clerks. And the thing I went before their Connecticut Association, and the thing that they request the most is communication. And I think communication is so important when you run, that you listen to people, you get their input, and you listen to advice. They're the ones that are at the grassroots level, that they're on the ground dealing with elections, and they have a lot to offer. My thing about is having an open door policy and a transparency where they can come and talk to me and says, if you need more training, let's work on more training. Let's work on getting more money through the General Assembly. Let's work on getting better machines and better technology. And those are the things that we need in the state of Connecticut.
I like our system where we have paper ballots.
Yes.
I've observed the audits to check the machines, you know, and we haven't had any problems with those. And a lot of people after the last presidential election were like, well, what about fraud? And I tell them, you need to go volunteer on Election Day and see how representatives of both parties are so heavily involved in every single aspect. Even when they go to collect absentee ballots at nursing homes, there's a Democrat and a Republican, like, you know, joined at the hip to talk to people, so that there's no, you can't get away with anything.
Exactly.
You know, it's really impossible to have any major level of fraud go on because of our system of checks and balances, and we have the paper backup.
Yes. And they take it very seriously. This
Yes.
is so, it's so involved, and they really take this job seriously because they're making a difference. They want to make sure that the votes are being counted, that there is no voter fraud. There's a lot of ways to do voter fraud, but sooner or later people are going to get caught. Whether you're filling out absentee ballots for somebody that passed away, or you're coming in with a different ID, saying that you're somebody else. Sooner or later you're going to get caught. I was looking at the fraud website today for the Secretary of the State. They have people, elected officials, and other people that have gotten, back into 1988. And and there's a few cases now that are still open, but it's very interesting. SEEK is there to make sure that they investigate. And if the FBI has to be brought in, or the state attorney's office, if it's a major, then, they will make sure that they're brought in, because that's the checks and balances, because you got to watch each other as to what you're doing. Voter fraud in the state of Connecticut is very, very limited. And if you do voter fraud, you're going to get caught sooner or later.
So last words, your elevator pitch.
I went to school at Southern Connecticut State University for teaching. I did that for a bit, and then I got into a bad marriage. So then I after that, I went into social services. So I've been doing social services for a very long time. I was a director of a Head Start program in a nonprofit organization right here in Meriden. I was director of the shelter. So I have that professional administration experience behind me. I also am now working for Senator Chris Murphy. I am the deputy director of casework. And we have 169 towns that we have to deal with, and we have 6 caseworkers. Back when he was in the House, we only had 3. But when he became a senator, now we have the whole state. So everybody has federal issues with the feds, of course, as you know, and IRS being the biggest one. So I am looking to be the Secretary of the State, because I know that I can make a difference. I know that I can get more people to vote. And if I go into the community and do community engagement, that I will be able to convince people that it's so important for them to have a voice when they vote. Because voting is what is the foundation of democracy.
Exactly.
And we have to make sure that in this country, that it continues to be that. It's the foundation. If you got to, your elected officials have to vote for bills. They have to introduce bills, they vote for bills. But you're voting for them to make sure that they're making the right decisions. And that is our foundation. And now, as you see what's going on nationally, they're investigating the electors in these 6 states. I was an elector at one time. And they're investigating these fraud electors. Finally, they're doing something in an investigation, because you're not going to get away with this stuff. Because if they get away with it, that shows the rest of the world that democracy is not going to last. And we have to be able to make sure that our democracy continues. And voting is a fundamental way that makes us different than anybody else, that we have a safe election. We have an election that people have a voice, and that people can select the people that they want to vote for, and that it's done in a peaceful way, except for what happened in January. And we have to make sure that doesn't occur again. And that's why people want to come to this country. And that's why people want to live here, because they can safely vote and not worry about getting killed, like a lot of these other countries. The changes that have to be made with the Secretary of the State, I want to make it together with folks that live in the community, that live out there, with the registrar of voters, with the town clerks, with the rest of the elected officials. That's very important. You have to be able to have a relationship. And you have to know how the system works behind the scenes in order to make sure that you keep the tradition of voting as it is. Of course, there's changes that we have to do, and I'm hoping that getting the word out and being that face of voting rights and voting change in the state of Connecticut, then people are going to be more safe about feeling better about coming out to vote.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out to talk to us here in Wallingford. Thank you for joining us for Community Conversations. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.